Stem cells are really, I think of them as these sort of pluripotential, just sort of these cells that can become anything, right? So there's stem cells that become gut cells and heart cells and brain cells and so forth. And really, they can also repair tissue. And so they are really powerful. And as we get older, my understanding is that they don't work as well. They're more exhausted and they don't work as well. They don't repair tissue as well or become other cells as easily.
Have you ever thought about what's really happening inside your body as you age? Aging isn't just about wrinkles or gray hair. It's a series of powerful processes taking place deep within, processes that quietly accelerate aging. But here's the empowering part. While these processes are predictable, they're not inevitable. They're not entirely out of your control. In fact, there's a simple formula that sums it all up. L equals C minus I. Longevity equals increased cellular repair minus inflammation. And when we boost our cells' ability to repair themselves and reduce the chronic inflammation, we can slow down the aging process and live with vitality and energy for many years to come. Today, I'm joined again by my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Tanmeet Sethi, to explore the final three mechanisms of aging: senescent cells, or zombie cells that disrupt your body's health; stem cell exhaustion, which reduces your body's ability to repair and regenerate; and finally, inflammaging, the chronic inflammation that accelerates aging and fuels disease. But this isn't just about understanding these mechanisms. It's about taking action. Dr. Tanmeet and I share simple, practical steps you can take to clear out damaged cells, reignite your body's natural repair systems, and calm inflammation. These are the keys to slowing aging and living with vitality no matter your age. By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with a better understanding of how these aging mechanisms affect your health. You'll also learn practical tools like anti-inflammatory diets, Ayurvedic herbs, and seasonal detoxes to reset your gut microbiome. And you'll also learn about simple but impactful changes you can make starting today to improve your longevity and feel your best. This conversation isn't just about adding years to your life. It's about adding vitality to those years. So, if you're ready to learn how to age with energy, strength, and purpose, this episode, the final part of our three-part series, where we break down the science of longevity and how you can live better longer. I'm Dr. Avanti, and this is The Healing Catalyst. Hi, Tanmeet. So great to be back with you.
Always.
Yes, definitely. And I am so excited. We are doing part 3 of our series on the mechanisms of aging. And this is part 3 of our series on longevity. So we're going to round it out with the last 3 mechanisms. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do this. And it's when everyone hears this, it will be actually launch day, publication day.
It's coming up that day.
Yeah, this episode's going to be out on December 17th, which is publication day. So,
so can I say happy launch day?
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited, even 2 weeks before when we're recording this.
I'm so excited because anyone listening, if they haven't listened to the prior 2, these 3 are a really nice intro to your book. So I'm excited that it's all coming together for people to hear.
Yeah. I think it's really important also to understand, the aging process and the mechanisms of aging, because then it's easier to understand longevity and sort of the flip side of that, and what are the practices you can do to extend your longevity. So that was really the aim of this series, and also the aim of talking about the mechanisms of aging in the book. So, let's dive in. Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. But first, let me tell you the 3 mechanisms that we're going to be talking about today, which is mechanism 7, which is senescent cells, mechanism 8, which is stem cell exhaustion, and mechanism 9, which is inflammaging. Inflammaging? Why do I always say this wrong?
I say inflammaging, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, anyway. Inflammaging. You say potato, I say potato.
Yeah. And I think that these three in particular are really helpful frames for people with longevity about longevity because what you hear kind of the narrative is sort of this very like, why does it have to be harder? Why, as I get older, why is this hard? I used to be able to do this. I used to be able to do that. And I think when you understand these three that we're going to talk about, you can understand that it is a little harder as we age. Like, that is the reality. And the truth is that our body needs more support as we age. And these are three reasons why. And so I think they're really helpful for people to frame that it's not this thing that your body is doing to you. It's what are you doing for your body as you age, right? Like, how can you really step up those practices?
Right, right. No, I think that's a really great frame sort of perspective to start with because that's true. It's sort of this idea, which is sort of one of the overarching ideas of the longevity formula, which is this idea of, all of this accumulation of damaged cells. And these three mechanisms actually speak to that specifically and directly. Not that the other mechanisms didn't, but this is like almost exactly what that's talking about. And so now you'll understand, like you were saying, sort of what happens as we live more years on Earth, right? We age chronologically, what happens to our cells that causes these issues of aging, right? And all the associated symptoms and chronic illnesses that we associate with aging, it happens because of these mechanisms and these three specifically. So, okay. So yeah, I think it's a really good point and really good frame. So let's start with the first one, which is mechanism 7, which is senescent cells. Now, what are senescent cells? First of all, they're like zombie cells. They're like these things that hang around too long, like you see in those movies. They're kind of like dead cells just hanging out, causing havoc
Yeah.
because they're hanging out. And they're basically damaged cells that stop dividing, but they don't actually die quite. They're kind of hanging around and then they cause all of these problems. They interfere with cellular processes, they cause inflammation in the tissues, they just wreak havoc, really. And so that is really what senescent cells are, is that as we age chronologically, we're going to have more of these cells hanging around because there's more of them to just sort of not die and just be around. So that's what that is. Any
Hmm.
thoughts about that?
Yeah. I mean, I sort of think of it like this kind of like clogged clutter almost, like it just, we need to continually kind of clean out a little bit. And yeah, I mean, zombie cells is the name that most people use. And
Mhm.
it's scary for a reason because they're all these sort of ineffective damaged cells running around, right?
Right. Right. They're literally just kind of hanging out and not going away. And so, and again, the causes of this really are the causes of senescent cells that don't die is that you have DNA mutations, you have oxidative stress, you have shortened telomeres. These are all mechanisms we've talked about in parts 1 and 2 of this series. Those are linked in the show notes for you. And it's also another big cause is sort of our immune system response, which starts to sort of age and become inefficient. And
Mhm.
so again, we have these cells just hanging out around and our bodies aren't able to clean them up as well. And so it's combination of all of these things that cause senescent cells to just wreak havoc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think I like this, not like this one, but I like this mechanism as a reminder of how simple things can help because, in Ayurveda, when we think about senescent cells, we think about really these pretty complex detoxification practices that
Mhm.
are more cumbersome and harder to do in modern society here, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because detoxification is um first of all, I mean, we could get into a whole discussion of, this whole detox and cleanses. And I've done episodes on that. Maybe we'll link them in the show notes. But, Western culture has sort of taken this idea of detoxification and changed it into this idea of cleansing, which is like juice cleanses and, these crazy fasts, like that are days and days longs, or, just drinking water or whatever it is. And that is not what detoxification is from an Ayurvedic perspective. Detoxification from an Ayurvedic perspective is to give your system rest, your digestion specifically, to give it rest so that it can actually perform optimally. And one of the things that it does, according to Ayurveda, is it cleans up these cells, right? And so if your digestion isn't working well, you are going to have more of these senescent cells sitting around, right? Because your digestion can't clean them up. So it's all connected, but the detoxification, there's a couple of different levels of detoxification in Ayurveda. There's panchakarma, which, I'm sure many of the listeners have heard about if they are really into Ayurveda, or, it's in the news a lot. A lot of celebrities will talk about it. Panchakarma is something that you need to do in a clinic under the supervision of an Ayurvedic practitioner or physician, because it's very, very involved. That is not what we're talking about in this episode. We're talking about detoxification that we do in Ayurveda seasonally to basically sort of clear out everything that's left over from the season before, so that we can go into the new season sort of starting at a more balanced state, so that we don't go out of balance even more. And again, the sort of correlation between Ayurveda and Western science or medicine is that when we are out of balance, we have inflammation, we have all of these chronic symptoms, illnesses that are caused from a medical Western point of view by things like senescent cells and shortened telomeres and DNA mutations, all of these mechanisms of aging. So that's how they correlate. But the detoxification that we do in Ayurveda seasonally, so we usually do it in the spring and in the fall. And it's really about resetting your digestion. So things that are very simple to do, you kind of clear your schedule for a few days, try and lighten up on all your responsibilities and your commitments. Eat sort of a mono diet, which helps the digestion rest. So usually khichdi is a big one. We do a lot of ghee because oil actually pulls out toxins. There's a lot of practices for sort of emptying your mind, dealing with emotions, journaling, self-reflection, breath work. These are all things that we can do during a seasonal detoxification, that, again, helps us to reset, bring our digestion up, to a healthy fire, healthy sort of burn, that then it can help with really processing these senescent cells and cleaning up. So I just went into a whole dialogue about that, but that's what we do in Ayurveda, really.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that people listening, if they're not used to the sort of ritual of seasonal resetting or seasonal cleansing, I don't want to use that word. Detox. Let me say that again. Seasonal detoxification.
Right.
Then there also, I think, even in Ayurveda or outside of Ayurveda, people can be reminded that we can also do that emptying of the mind more regularly as well, right? That those are the sort of seasonal times that are most helpful for us, but also there's a rhythm to which we are supposed to empty our mind at regular intervals. So whether that's for you, turn your phone off on Friday evening till Saturday evening, or whatever it is, off a screen, or not checking emails for the weekend, or however you do it. I think it's important for people to understand that those rituals through the seasons also can be brought into each season, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a really good point. It's not just a seasonal detox that you do twice a year, right? I mean, I think that, some of the things that both of us teach is that these are processes you should be doing every day as often as you can to help keep your body in balance. We talk about the circadian rhythm and sort of that circadian 24-hour sort of rhythm that we should be on, and how important it is to reset our bodies every single day for so many reasons: physiological, the hormonal reasons, autophagy, which is, related to senescent cells. There's all these different triggers that we can actually activate on a daily basis by practicing some form of detoxification, like you're saying, whether it's emptying your mind, emptying your bowels, fasting, all of these things are detoxification in different ways. And really important, really important. And I think that, one thing that we get so focused on in our culture is we all think about food from a cleansing or sort of from a detoxification perspective, um, which I think is where the problems begin because we think it's just about the food. And that's why these juice cleanses and all of these sort of trendy cleanses don't exactly work. They work in some ways, but they don't work fully because you haven't dealt with the mind and the spirit as well as the emotions. You're only dealing with sort of the physical in those cleanses
That's
or
a really good point.
detoxification.
And sometimes those cleanses are stressful for people.
Hmm.
So, it may even be counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, that's actually interesting because, I was looking up some studies about this. So there was a study done in 2010 in the Annual Review of Pathology. And basically, they identified something called SASP, which stands for senescence associated secretory phenotype, if I can say that right. And basically, what they found is that senescent cells actually release SASPs, which are inflammatory signals, which are really a key player in the aging process. So even more than just the senescent cells causing havoc, just by lying around and causing inflammation, they actually also release inflammatory signals, which cause problems. So it's sort of like a double whammy almost. And so, again, through some stress management and anti-inflammatory sort of detoxification practices that we do daily, what we can do is we can actually reduce the amount of those signals that are going out by these senescent cells because we're reducing that stress level. So it kind of all, again, going back to what you were saying is that, some of these quote Western cleanses are actually stressful. So they cause the opposite problem. But with detoxification on a daily basis, and even this gentle sort of more, gentle approach at a seasonal time that we talk about in Ayurveda, you're not stressing out the system, which
Yeah.
is counterproductive.
Yeah. I learned about SASPs through you.
Well, there
So
you go.
I didn't know that they secreted those.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's another thing. So, so that's how senescent cells work. So let's just talk about some, simple things. We've already alluded to detoxification, right? The seasonal resets in Ayurveda. That's a really great thing to do to help with this mechanism. Another thing that we can be doing, like we've talked about before, is fasting, right? Basically, that's the fasting overnight. This is not any fancy fasting or anything like that. It's literally not eating when you're sleeping, when you should be sleeping for 12 hours. Again, that will stimulate autophagy every night to help with that cleanup. So you don't have more of this, inflammaging happening and senescent cells sticking around. So those are two big things to think about. Anything else that you can think of?
Well, I mean, really, when I think of that sort of clutter, moving that clutter out, uh, gentle movement can be helpful, right? So just thinking about how can I move these cells because they're too tired to do anything. They're too dead. So I think about gentle movement,
Mhm.
some yoga, stretching, walking.
Mhm. Yeah, and then meditation, we talked about that, emptying the mind. So really anything that you are doing as, a self-care practice ritual for your health and wellness, if it is something that's going to help detoxify in some way, clear your mind, clear your body, your emotions, your spirit, that's detoxification and that's going to help with this mechanism of aging. It's going to be something that's going to turn off that mechanism of aging. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a way to look at it too.
Did you find any research when you were writing your book about sauna and senescent cells? Because I would think that would help.
Yeah, sauna. So, a couple of different things. So, sort of, there were some studies actually that showed how senescent cells are how they contribute to skin aging, to the aging of the skin. And again, the skin being the largest organ of the body, it's a major path for detoxification. And so sauna is one of the things we can do. We also in Ayurveda do abhyanga with oil, again, to pull toxins out. So anything that's going to pull toxins out of the skin, the largest organ of the body, you are going to help with this process of
Yeah. Okay.
detoxification. Yeah. So definitely. Absolutely. Um, what's your favorite type of sauna to do or,
Oh,
practice with sauna?
you mean infrared versus
Hmm.
wood, or
Yeah.
I like good old wood finish
Yeah.
saunas, dry saunas. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I
Why?
I mean, I don't mind an infrared. I just like I like the whole ritual of it. And in a wooden sauna with, especially if there's steam, I can put some eucalyptus in it and I just feel more at ease. I really love it.
Hmm. Yeah, I like it too. I mean, I sometimes find the infrared because it is that dry heat. I don't know. I get really stressed out in an infrared. I don't know why it is. I think it might be something with my claustrophobia. Okay, TMI for the whole list for all the listeners. But I feel like when it's a wet sauna with the steam, I just feel like it's nourishing my skin, and maybe it's just a psychological thing. I like how it feels, and I feel like I'm sweating out the toxins. Whereas I don't know in a dry sauna, I don't know. I mean, I know it's very good for you. Either one is
Yeah, they're both good for
yeah,
you.
it's just your preference. So,
Yeah.
okay, great. So let's move on to the next mechanism, which is mechanism number 8, which is stem cell exhaustion. Do you want to tell us about this one, Tanmeet?
Yeah, I mean, stem cells are really, I think of them as these sort of pluripotential, just sort of these cells that can become anything, right? And so there's stem cells that become gut cells and heart cells and brain cells and so forth. And really, they can also repair tissue. And so they are really powerful. And as we get older, my understanding is that they don't work as well. They're more exhausted and they don't work as well. They don't repair tissue as well or become other cells as easily,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Right. And so, again, stem cell exhaustion is also related to all of the other mechanisms, right, of aging. So, whether it's the DNA damage, the protein damage, inflammaging, all of these other mechanisms, they all kind of, I mean, what you're going to find out, really, all the listeners, is that when you start thinking about all these mechanisms, they're all related. And I actually wrote about that in the book. But again, it's important to understand how each of them works, and then you'll understand how they work together. Kind of
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's see. What are some of the causes of stem cell exhaustion, would you say?
Yeah. So again, you're going to hear some repetition, right? But you can have that chronic inflammation that we've been talking about can exhaust stem cells, or
Right.
you could have actually damage from toxins. And those toxins can be environmental toxins, but there are also toxins that, as you had mentioned, from senescent cells, there are also toxins that we secrete from our gut, for instance, and from many of our cells, and they can damage stem cells. Stress is always, I mean, it sounds repetitive, but these things are really toxic.
Right.
Uh, Poor food choices. So all of those could cause stem cell exhaustion.
Mhm. Yeah, and some of the studies, again, one of the seminal studies that was done, again, I looked this up, was one that showed that for our blood stem cells, which, basically aging reduces the functionality and the regeneration or the regenerative capacity of stem cells in the blood. So that means it's actually affecting all of our blood cells, all of our immunity cells. So it causes, a slower, weaker immune system and slower recovery rates. And so that was one of the main, like a major seminal study that showed how important stem cells are in the aging process. And so that is one thing to think about. And then another one that I found really interesting, this was done in 2020 by a group, um, and it was published in Nature Communications, which was that exercise is what they found actually preserves stem cell function and can delay aging. And so they literally found that regular exercise was protective of stem cell health, which I find so interesting because it's like, again, sometimes it feels like these are such simple things we can do, but they really work. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be complicated. So something as simple as exercise can help to maintain your stem cells, which means you can still differentiate into all of these things that you need in your body as you age.
No, it's really powerful when you think about the simplicity of it, right? It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's quite
Right.
simple and clear
Mhm.
that the more we move, the better off we are. And our mitochondria are less dysfunctional, which we talked about before. Your stem cells work better. You clear out more senescent cells. I mean, there's various ways that movement is crucial to our lives.
Yeah. And, the other thing that we also found in some studies, not we, but has been found in stem cell is the journal. In 2015, a group found that specifically caloric restriction, dietary calorie restriction, would increase stem cell function and therefore extend lifespan. Now, this was in animal models, but we know that this is true in humans as well. We've discovered that. So again, simple, not easy, but both movement and food, your dietary choices, have a major direct impact on stem cells and all the mechanisms, but specifically this one that we're talking about.
Yeah. And these studies really just prove how somehow ancient medicine knew that before these studies. These are everything you're describing are simple Ayurvedic practices that have been known forever.
Right. Right. And it's like what I always say is that, modern medicine proves ancient wisdom once again. And that's what I find so fascinating about all of this is that, and I've told this story before many times on this podcast, is that for me, the connections were so just like coming fast and furious when I was, first started studying medicine. Because I was like, oh, that's Ayurveda. That's Ayurveda. That's Ayurveda. Like every study, everything that we would learn in medical school, I was like, that's Ayurveda. That's Ayurveda. And so, it's quite incredible when you start thinking about it that way.
Yeah. And I mean, even not fasting overnight, but caloric restriction just in terms of eating to satiety but not fullness, that's a very ancient Ayurvedic practice that now and East Asian in general as well. And it's just now it's understood in these scientific studies that, eating too much is not good for you. And aside from weight, we're talking about actually the stress of that much food.
Right. Right. Exactly. And so again, it comes down to this whole idea of stress, right? And what is causing stress that leads to toxins that accumulate, right? And there we go. It's sort of like if you understand this basic principle and if you can start to think about things in this sort of simplistic way, like we're describing these mechanisms that can be very complicated, but what I hope that all of the listeners are seeing is that when you sort of strip away all the complexity, it comes down to some very simple mechanisms that we're talking about. The more that we increase the stress on our bodies, on our cells, the more that there's going to be toxins that are going to accumulate, which are going to cause all these problems, specifically inflammation. And then that's where the problems start. And that's where we have that physiological aging that happens, right? That causes, the decline that we see as we age chronologically. So it's sort of this very simple way to look at it, which, yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. So again, as far as the things that you can do for this specific mechanism for stem cell exhaustion is, movement, fasting, the things that we've already talked about. Those are really, really important to help with protecting these stem cells so that they can continue to differentiate into everything we need in our bodies as we age. So we'll move on to the last mechanism of aging, which is inflammaging. I don't even know if I'm saying this right. I'm going to keep laughing about that. Now, this one is like, this is sort of the one that we've been waiting to get to, because mechanism 9, which is inflammaging, is actually related to every other mechanism of aging. This kind of ties everything together. Yeah. And what inflammaging refers to is this sort of chronic, low grade inflammation that develops as we age, right? And so what you will see is that it's both a cause and a result of all of the other mechanisms of aging too. So it's sort of this, again, circular sort of diagram that we see, is that, we have DNA mutations or protein damage or mitochondrial dysfunction or nutrient sensing, dysregulation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And those all will cause, decreased cellular function, accumulation of these cells that are dead or kind of hanging out, zombies, right? Which then causes inflammation, this inflammaging. So there you go. There's the cycle right there.
Yeah. And then what you're trying to show is that also in that cycle, the more inflammaging you have, the more dysfunctional your cells get. And so we're in a kind of endless loop unless we're working to disrupt that loop a little bit.
Exactly. Exactly. And then, the way that Ayurveda, sort of gets pulled into this is this idea of tissue nourishment. Because when we have that cycle that we just talked about going on, what we're doing is we're depleting the tissue layers. From an Ayurvedic perspective, that is causing depletion of the tissues, which then causes all of the symptoms, illnesses associated with aging. So that's how they kind of connect from my perspective of how Ayurveda and Western science come together, is at that tissue level, but it's this inflammaging that's really the problem. So, and some of the major causes, again, we've talked about many of them. One of them, of course, is the accumulation of those senescent cells, the oxidative stress that happens, the accumulation of toxins. But then the interesting thing is that another specific cause that was found to cause inflammaging is gut dysbiosis, which is an imbalanced microbiome, which then leads to leaky gut. And there was a study that was done in 2012 in the Journal of Clinical Investigation, is where it was published, that basically showed that the gut microbiome, if it's imbalanced, will actually lead to increased inflammatory markers, which then drives age-related chronic diseases. So that was how they saw that was directly involved in this. And so once again, modern science proves ancient wisdom, because we've known in Ayurveda that your gut, your digestion, is the seat of your health. So there once again, we've proved it in Western science.
Yeah, I know. It's great how these studies are proving it.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard for people to understand that when the gut is leaky, quote unquote, like that, then it's really not just food that's going through there, right? It's actually harmful bacteria in our microbiome, but it's these toxins that our bacteria secrete, like we were referring to earlier. And unfortunately, the more non-beneficial bacteria you have, the more of those toxins are secreted. And so it becomes another little cycle in the gut of creating more inflammation.
Right. And it's also, that imbalance of the microbiome happens because you've got more of the harmful bacteria and less of the supportive bacteria. Is basically you're changing that ratio. And so that's also what causes that problem. So if you've got more of the harmful bacteria, you have more of those toxins that are being released by that bacteria, which will overwhelm the system, right? Yeah. So it's all a balance, right? And it's sort of, how do you keep your microbiome healthy? Well, it's through an anti-inflammatory diet, which is very much the way we eat in Ayurveda. Using spice as medicine, huge benefits there, in an anti-inflammatory diet. Things like turmeric, ginger, What are your other favorites as far as spices go?
Well, I really like different herbs as well. I love turmeric and ginger, but also I really like cilantro and parsley and all herbs. Really, rosemary, thyme, all have really important anti-inflammatory properties. So these garnishes that we use are, I would finish them off the plate at your restaurant. I would not leave them, and ask for more. So, really getting those kitchen cabinet medicine into you with the spices and the herbs for sure. But I love turmeric and ginger. I also love cumin is a really nice one, and
Mhm.
cilantro. So ground cilantro, coriander is a really nice anti-inflammatory spice. And chili pepper is a great one. So ground chili, chilies have amazing polyphenols and
Yep.
anti-inflammatory nutrients. So there's just a lot of ways to get it in there and have a better meal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's more than flavor, it's also medicine. And so,
Yeah.
I always get asked this question of like, which are the best herbs or spices to use? What should I be using? And I'm sort of like, you know what? Whatever you like, that's a good place to start. There's no what should I be using? What's the best thing? What's the perfect way? There's no such thing. Just start using them, start experimenting. Things like turmeric and ginger are pretty easy to add to most savory dishes, I think. And they kind of sort of go with a lot of things.
Mhm.
So those are good ones to start with. But even if you start with black pepper,
Yeah.
and a little bit of salt or some chili pepper, that's great too, simple things like that. Really,
Right.
really easy.
And I think people get too caught up in what do I eat? And really, if you break it down, you want to think about those beneficial bacteria thrive when they get fiber and roughage, so really good produce. They really thrive. And the non-beneficial bacteria thrive when we're not getting enough of that. You want to grow your good bacteria. So you have to give them the food that they use to grow. And so if you think about it as fiber, roughage, and a rainbow of colors, a variety of colors of produce, you're going to really start. If you start there, you're going to get a lot of what you need.
Mhm. I love the visual of thinking about it as feeding your good sort of beneficial bacteria. So literally you're thinking about what are you gonna feed those bacteria so that they thrive?
Yeah. I mean, my kids will tell you with a slanted eye, kind of looking up because they're teenagers and young adults now, that I used to ask them all the time when they were kids, what have you fed your buggies today? Your
Really?
gut, yeah, and they think I'm crazy. But yeah, I would ask them, have you fed them anything today? Because none of that counts. And I look at these, whatever they got at school, like that doesn't count.
Right.
So you
Right.
have to feed it if you want it to thrive, you have to feed it good food.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, so that's a main way, one of the best ways that we can sort of counter this inflammaging mechanism is using food as medicine. You and I are big proponents of that. So really that anti-inflammatory diet, feeding your gut microbiome, um, and then all of the other things that we've talked about, throughout this series, whether it is fasting, or getting your morning sunlight to reset your circadian rhythm, getting adequate sleep, all the basics. If you can just start to do that, that will really help to counter all of these mechanisms of aging.
Yeah, and I think sleep, we did a whole episode on sleep, but just to mention how important it is that if this all feels overwhelming, these 9 mechanisms, and what do I do first? I would say first make sure you're sleeping well, because if you're sleeping well, you'll get rest for all those senescent cells and stem cells, but also you'll get, detoxifying work happening while you're sleeping, and you'll feel better in the day to make other changes. So I think that's really the bedrock of what we could start with. And then from there, if you're well rested, your body's going to feel supported and you're going to have gotten a fast, right? So then you're getting kind of the best start possible to these practices, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea is that really, Focusing in on a quick win, as we always talk about, right? So don't go for the most difficult thing that's going to be the hardest for you to change. That, like, when you think about all of these different suggestions that we've given you, and you're like, oh, there's no way I could do that. Maybe don't start with that one. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't try that, because you probably need to if you're saying, oh, I don't want to do that, right? But you want to go for a quick win, because when we have those little successes, it builds upon it, right? So then the next step becomes a little easier. You're like, oh, I was successful at that. I'm going to try this, right? So go for the easy win, the quick win. And I think the sleep is a really great idea. I know some people, well, many people have a lot of trouble with sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not
Um,
so quick a win.
yeah, and that can be really stressful. And so if that's true for you, then maybe the sleep is not the one that you're going to start with, even though you can sort of get all these other benefits. But what would you say to someone who says, "Yeah, I really have a hard time sleeping?"
Yeah. So I would say what I would say to anyone, which is don't let the perfect be the enemy of any step. And so it might be that you start with something else. Maybe you start with making your dinner earlier so you're fasting a little longer, a 12-hour fast. And that will eventually help your sleep, by the way, that you'll
Right.
sleep more deeply. Or maybe it's just that you really want to focus on sleep, but it feels hard. Then maybe you just focus on one aspect. Can I have a wind down routine where I'm doing less to clutter my mind before sleep?
Right.
Can I eat earlier? Can I, change the way that I wake up, not looking at my phone or whatever it is? But in general, I would say if anything feels too hard, just think of small, powerful steps, because no step will get you nowhere. But one small step will get you a lot farther towards where you need to go,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think we just think about, I could never get 8 hours of restful sleep, and I would think more about how can I make my sleep better? What could I do?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great perspective. So mechanism 7 was senescent cells, right? Those zombie cells that kind of hang around. Mechanism 8 was stem cell exhaustion, which are those cells that can become anything, but as we age, they lose that potential. And then mechanism 9 is sort of the one that rounds them all up, which is inflammaging, which is caused by all of them and causes all of them. So those are the 9 mechanisms of aging. And if you can really start to understand each of these mechanisms, but also how they sort of connect to each other, it really informs your sort of, I think, attitude towards doing some of these practices, because you're like, oh, I get it. When I make those food choices, that's actually countering this, and this that would be causing the physiological aging and all of these symptoms and illnesses that I might be, susceptible to as I age. But if I really focus in on just this one thing, changing my diet, feeding my good microbiome, that is going to be a huge, like you said, it's a small step, but it's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, small steps add up to big ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Tanmeet, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so excited for your book. I think anyone who's listened to this series might really, if you're really interested, then your book is perfect, because then you really go into what to do about these things, right?
Yeah.
And it also reminds us that longevity is so much more than how long we live. And so I'm
Mhm.
excited for everyone to get it.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll do this again soon in the new year. Yeah.
Yeah.